So good afternoon, everyone. I'm known in the society as runic. I have an Order of the Laurel from the Kingdom of Atlantia, and I believe it's in Viking culture. And I have a PhD from Trinity College Dublin, where the Book of Kells lives, where I studied Viking archaeology. And I also run my own YouTube channel called the Modern Erilar, where I talk about runes and futharks for interested non-specialists. And as a bit of a caveat, um, both the United States federal government and the Society for Creative Anachronism, I am presenting my own work here, and neither of those entities endorses either my work or my channel necessarily. But hopefully, what you hear today will be convincing that I know what I'm talking about. I've spent my 10,000 hours, that's for sure. So thank you for joining me today at the University of Atlantia for a presentation on the Younger Futhark and its developments during and after the Viking Age. While I will be taking you through concepts that I really didn't learn until graduate school, I promise that you will be able to understand the spoken linguistic changes that explain why the written language also changed. I will assume that you know that runes are a Germanic writing system and that there are an elder and a younger Futhark, but I will not make assumptions past that point. I will explain every linguistic term that I use, and if I name a rune, I will try to point to it. And so, case in point, you will hear me using multiple names for the same rune graph or shape. So this shape here, uh, the names Fehu, Feu, and Fey all can be used for this first rune in the Futhark. And this is because different sources, for example, different rune poems, recorded different names for the same rune graph in different times and places. So when I'm talking about Elder Futhark, I tend to refer to this rune as Fehu, but when I'm talking about Younger Futhark, I tend to refer to it as Fey. Even though these have basically the same shape, there's different names that change over time. And then along those lines, we also have different shapes, like a jagged S of either direction, and then this other one that's a line that stops about halfway down and terminates in a dot. These are all valid ways of writing a rune that is called soul. And these different but equally valid shapes are called allographs, sort of like how you can write a lowercase a using a circle and a line, and then in a different font, sometimes there's a little curlicue over top of it, and it's still a lowercase a. It's very much like that. These are just different graphs, different ways of writing the same rune. And to explain why it's the younger Futhark, this is another preliminary thing. We first need to know that the elder Futhark and the Proto-Scandinavian language that it recorded began to differ regionally as spoken language evolved during the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries of the Common Era, or what you might know as Anno Domini. The Proto-Scandinavian language developed into new languages that we group into the term Old Norse. And I'd like to be clear that Old Norse as a term is a construct. Proto-Scandinavian actually split into different dialects, which later developed into different languages. These are Old West Norse, Old East Norse, and Old Gutnish from the island of Gotland. These all being the ancestors of the respective modern languages, including Old Icelandic after about 900. And I will use Old Norse here because it's such a widespread term that you're probably already familiar with. And just to start from level setting here, the Elder Futhark itself had 24 runes, but the Younger Futhark of Old Norse ultimately contracted to just 16 runes. So let's start to talk about how and why. An inscribed fragment of human cranium from Ribe in Denmark shows that the transition to Younger Futhark and its simplified forms was nearly complete by the second quarter of the 8th century. This particular inscription shows one of each of the Younger Futhark runes except for one and retains only Hagalas and Manas of the Elder Futhark. So let's take a closer look at the Futhark from this particular artifact and assess what has simplified in comparison with the Elder Futhark. And as I mentioned, there's one rune, Oz, which did not appear in a word within this inscription. So I've placed this rune in brackets so that you can remember which one that is later. Otherwise, you can see right off the bat that if we compare the Elder Futhark and then the Futhark that we see on the Reba fragment, right off, the transition loses 8 of the runes down to the 16 that I mentioned, but there's still a lot of continuity between the various graphs that you see between the two lines. One new ending R, rune ir, appears here where algis had been, but it's just vertically reversed so that the twigs are pointing downward instead of upward. More on that rune in a little bit. The Reba skull fragment shows runes that consist predominantly of one stave with twigs, and the stave is the longer, usually upright foundation line, and the twigs or the branches are typically horizontal or diagonal strokes that differentiate the various runes. One of the characteristics of the Younger Futhark is that the rune forms decrease the number of vertical lines or staves per rune form, and there is a logic here. In winnowing down to 16 runes, Younger Futhark kept only the simpler form of any of the different consonant types, which speeds writing. So of the runes that represent the T and the D sounds, we have kept only the less complex shape of the tir, and we've gotten rid of the dago sound. And we do this also with the P and the B sounds. We keep only the B. And then also the K sound and the G. These actually morph into this new form here called kaun. And so what is the logic behind this simplification? This is because rune writers stopped distinguishing between voiced and voiceless consonants, and these are going to be different types of consonants where you stop the airflow with either your lips or your tongue. And so they're called stops. And voicing is whether your vocal cords move as you make a specific sound. So in voiced sounds, your vocal cords move, whereas in voiceless sounds, they do not. And to illustrate this, and because we've got our mics off and this is a great time to practice, you can try this yourself. So B and P are a voiced and a voiceless bilabial stop made with both of your lips. And D and T are a voiced and a voiceless alveolar stop, where you bounce your tongue off of the bony ridge right behind your front teeth. And then G and K and ing are a voiced and a voiceless and a nasal velar stop made with the back part of your tongue against your soft palate, so in the back of the roof of your mouth. And all of those are the same type of sound. In Younger Futhark, rune writers chose a single, simpler form to indicate both types of the same stop, regardless of whether it's voiced or voiceless. So as an example, you can write tir, oz, kaun, and it can mean either dag, meaning day, or tak, meaning take. And context clues would tell the reader which word the writer meant. If we look at the Jur stone from the island of Hjailand, it shows us the end of this transitional period and a more recognizable Viking Elder Futhark. And you'll see that the Hagalas has now transitioned to the star form of the rune, whereas this had previously been used for A sounds. And then we also have Manas has now evolved into mum. Usually you see it as a form that looks very much like algaes with two twigs that are upright, looking very much like a person with their arms up. But here, this one, those twigs join back up to the stave, and it looks like a ring up at the top of the stave. So in this set of runes, all of these particular runes have a single stave. So that's the development that we're seeing here. And I already mentioned a new ending R rune Ir, which appears in the Younger Futhark. And for context, in Elder Futhark, it looks like this. The rune Algis with its arms pointing up, and it represents a type of Z sound. And it started as a proper Z and then transitioned to a palatal R J sound, where you shape your mouth like you're going to say the J sound, but you make an R noise. And again, this is a good one to practice with your mic off. J is the noise that is the transitional as it evolves into an R sound. So between 500 and 900, we see an evolution between this Algis and a Writhe rune and an Ir rune, where we can watch the sounds that they indicate start to overlap. And on two 6th century runestones from Stentoften and Easteby, we can see Algis and Ir being used here in the words Hideir and Hérwolafir, where there's definitely an R sound at the end of the syllables, where we might expect there to be a Z sound or a J, because this is Elder Futhark that we're seeing here. But on the other hand, we see a group of runestones from Fyn and Zealand in Denmark that are carved by the same rune master, whose name is Soti, for the same patron, whose name is Ragnhildur. And Soti uses Writhe where we might expect an R to write her name, Ragnhildur. And Ir is what he uses to write the word sons, where it's definitely a Z kind of a sound. So the R and the Z sounds are either overlapping or very, very similar during this 400-year period in Denmark. And Viking Age runestones will often use Ir for the last rune to spell words like mother, father, sister, or brother, where the sound is definitely R and not J. In Norway and Norwegian settled areas, the final R evolved from a palatal R into a real R that we would think of as modern English speakers very quickly. And we very much see an innovation in Norway where a regular writhe rune is being used at the end of words instead of the Ir. The earliest instance that we see of this is on the Dynna stone, where writhe is replacing Ir at the end of the words. And this happens in the second quarter of the 11th century in the words Gunvor and Daughter. Eventually, this practice spreads to the rest of Scandinavia as the differentiation between these sounds disappeared. And so Ir becomes used for a Y sound, which you can see here in the name Eyvinder. So that's what they're doing in Denmark and Norway, and those are dialects of Old West Norse. So in Old East Norse, which they spoke in Sweden, the distinction between Ir and Writhe persisted, and these two separate sounds definitely appeared distinct from each other well into the Swedish Viking Age, at usage distributions that are similar to pre-Viking Age forms of the language. So Ir did not evolve into a Y sound in Sweden until the medieval period. It's much earlier used in Norway. One change that we do see in Sweden, though, is that the star rune starts to be used for a fricative G, like the modern Greek gamma, or the G in the Spanish word amigo. So it's a very much you roll through that particular sound. During the Viking Age, we eventually also see a divergence in different types of Younger Futhark used in different areas. And the most common one is that the branches start to shorten. And you'll see the length of the lower branch here in this Fey rune is shorter than the Fey who shown up here. And then in the Nauth rune, you'll see that this also shortens as well. The Futharks that tend to have the shorter twigs are helpfully called short twig, and the longer ones are called long branch or long twig. And both of these are valid ways of talking about it because it is translated into English. It's just talking about the smaller branches of a tree. The long branch runes are the most common type overall, and most rune stones tend to be using this particular style of Younger Futhark, especially the Danish rune stones that you'll be interested in. Short twig runes are used, they're both faster and simpler than the long twig runes, but these appear only very rarely in what used to be Viking Denmark. They appear much more often in Swedish and Norwegian contexts. So scholars have referred to them as Swedish Norwegian runes, but they definitely occurred in Denmark, and we know because we have found them. So, two carved lengths of wood from the Viking settlement at Heiteby show inscriptions using short twig runes. And this one includes a full futhark in a short twig variant. And here we do actually see the staves of this nasal A rune fully crossing the stave. And this nasal A and the B rune shown here are actually two very diagnostic runes for showing short twig runes. And there's different ways that you can see either of these runes written in short twig. So either they can fully cross the stave, or for this nasal A, they can go up and to the left or down and to the right. As long as that direction is maintained, it means that same rune. So, with the broad dating of this particular find to all but the last 50 years of occupation at the site, which was abandoned in about 1050 when it was attacked, this particular find really doesn't help us have a chronology for the evolution of these particular runes, but rune scholars just kind of generally can't agree on exactly when divergence between long branch and short twig futharks occurred. And it's not always clear that the separation is as complete as a lot of basic books on runes would lead you to believe. And in present-day Sweden, there are only about 40 inscriptions in short twig futhark, which can be dated to the 9th or the 10th centuries, and 30 of these are runestones. Those are the black dots shown there. And the short twig inscriptions are distributed throughout the country, though we've got some concentrations here in Östergötland, in Gotland, and in Uppland. Inscriptions with only long branch runes, however, are relatively rare, and these almost always appear in very coastal areas, never in the interior where the short twig runes appear. And after the year 1000, if we look at runic usage overall, rune writers in early and mid-Viking Age Sweden and Norway both chose a greater variety of runes and experimented more than did rune writers in Denmark. Both long and short twig variants of runes appear on the movable object inscriptions recovered from the trading port at Birke. So you can see long branch Fehu here, but you can see a short twig Sol, a short twig R rune. And so we've got a coexistence here of the short and the long branch in this same inscription. And we see this multiple times. This particular sheet is a little bit later from Birke as well, but we see runes that are long branch and short twig coexisting in the same piece. And maybe we can conclude from this that this is the nature of cosmopolitan trading areas where different groups of people were able to mix together and meet, and they're trading runes with each other, but without more information about exactly who from what area is writing which of the runes, we really can't say too much about who is teaching whom these particular runes. The early Viking Age inscription from Hoge in Bohuslän also has a short twig T, and the second N here is also a short twig right next to a short twig nasal A, but it's got long branch variants of the ending R and M rune here. And mixed inscriptions like this are rare overall in Viking Age Sweden, but they're very common specifically in the provinces within the region of Norrland, which comprises Hälsingland, Medelpad, and Jämtland. So it's north of Stockholm, which is why it's called Norrland. In this region, rune writers used mostly long twig runes, but with N, A, S, and T. That's Nauð, Or, Sol, and Tir written in their short twig forms. And in this region, they also typically still didn't use some kind of punctuation. You'll see little dots here in the middle of this inscription. And these are division marks to divide words within an inscription. And the fact that they don't tend to use those in this area is a bit of an archaism. Because usually by the Viking Age, you get these little dots or maybe a colon, a tiny X, a little cross, to divide the words. And so perhaps we should understand the Norrland inscriptions as a throwback to an older form, but the relatively sparse survival of inscriptions from before the year 1000 makes it difficult to be confident that we can really see a trend here. But we know overall we can use either short twig or long branch runes or mix the two, depending upon where in Sweden we are. If we compare finds from Norway, we can see that these are also a mix of short twig and long branch runes. And Michael Barnes refers to the Norwegian Younger Futhark as a mixed Futhark as well. And more frequently than not, Norwegian medieval rune writers used a mixed Futhark on their runestones. And as an example, on N251 from Stavanger, we can see both a rune where the branch goes up and to the right and terminates at the stave, and then one that fully crosses a stave in order to indicate an A sound. And there are also two S runes. There's this one that looks like a runic S that you might recognize. And then there's also this variant that shows up twice within this inscription, which is a less frequent medieval long branch variant of the Sol rune. And this usage of multiple runes for the same sound sometimes means that these runes are allographs of each other. But during the medieval period, we do also have clear examples of the sounds of the runes evolving and the differentiation in the rune graphs indicating slightly different sounds. So they're choosing different allographs to use in the same inscription to indicate different sounds. And so I would pronounce these words Kjetil Reisti. And so we do actually have different A sounds, and they're using different runes that are allographs of each other or had been up to this point in order to indicate those different A sounds. Stone N184 from Galteland is now fragmentary, but enough drawings were made of it in the 17th century that we can reconstruct, as you can see here, what this particular stone used to look like. This stone references a campaign by the Danish king Knut the Great about the year 1020, and England is spelled in a very strange way, I-K-L-A-T. So it's not England, it's Iklat, or if you transliterated it, that's how it would be spelled in modern Latin characters. So what's going on here? This is because of the non-representation of a nasal before a homorganic consonant. Yes, I'm about to explain. If sounds are made in the same part of the mouth, they are homorganic. When a word in languages that we usually call Proto-Scandinavian Old Norse is spelled with an M or an N followed by a consonant that's made in the same part of the mouth, like M and B or P, often the rune for the nasal consonant, the M or the N sound, is not written. And this is true in both Elder and Younger Futhark. Um, and with Younger Futhark, this goes through the medieval period. So this is one thing that you can do in your usage of runes. And this is most common before a D, B, or G sound, that we do see it before N, T, S, F, and thorn. So the kind of sounds. And after the development of Younger Futhark, in similar words, the rune writer on occasion chose to write the M instead of the following consonant. So sometimes we see the spelling kuml, Kuml, for the Old Norse word kumbl, which means a monument, a marker, a runestone. Though the spelling kubl, Kubl, kaun os bricka lauger, is much, much, much more common. Staveless runes do seem to have been an experimental development from the late 10th and early 11th centuries, and these removed, for the most part, the vertical line, the stave, but for ease, because it is just a stave, that does have to persist in that particular rune. And the historian Magnus Celsus was the first to figure out that we read these by looking at the relative position of the twig between the top and the bottom bounding line of any given runestone. And so if we're looking at one of the inscriptions, you'll see that sometimes they're in these snake-looking or zoomorphic characters. And so within the boundaries of that snake, you'll just look at where's the top, where's the bottom, and figure out where the twig is in order to figure out which rune we're talking about. These runes appear on a handful of stones that come from Hälsingland, Södermanland, and occasionally in Medelpad. All of these being in eastern Sweden, and on 3 movable artifacts from Uppland, and then there's one on a stick from Bergen over in Norway that's hard to read. And everywhere but in Hälsingland, the staveless runes appear in an inscription mixed with Younger Futhark runes. And the form of specific staveless runes varies considerably, but this is a rune row that is synthesized from the inscriptions from around Hälsingland, where they are most numerous. Now, the most obvious reason for why staveless runes might develop would be the speed with which they can be written as an everyday script, but there's 2 problems with this particular argument. The first is that they're slower to interpret, and the probability for misinterpretation is much greater than with runes that do contain a stave. The second is that there's a greater incidence of their survival on rune stones than on rune sticks, where one would expect a faster system to have been used for more day-to-day communications on a disposable medium. So overall, the experiment seems to have been relatively short-lived and of fairly local impact, with very little overall impact on the mainstream runic writing in Scandinavia, but nearly every book on runes brings these up, so I kind of have to mention them. But they're neither common nor are they very widespread. So other developments in the Younger Futhark were much more enduring, and if we look at one of the medieval Norwegian finds, the Hofstad inscription, we can see that 2 of the runes, here and here, these have dots, and these dotted runes are also called stung runes because this little diacritic mark looks like a bee sting. And these differentiate these runes as having a sound that is unique to the unmarked version of the rune. And we know from the fact that both the dotted and the undotted version appear in the same inscription that we are dealing with separate runes. Dotted runes are not included when writing a rune row, though. If you see a full Futhark rune row, the writer only ever chose to write the 16 runes of the Younger Futhark without any of the dotted runes. And so why are we doing this? The stung runes reintroduced the distinction between voiced and unvoiced consonants within the written language, that it disappeared during the pre-Viking transition from the Elder Futhark into the Younger, and reintroducing this is very useful indeed. And these stung runes first appeared during the late Viking Age, though only stung E's for E, stung Kaun for G, and stung Ur for Y were used to any great degree before the medieval period. And it's usually only Danish rune writers who are using this because, as you'll remember, Ir became used for the Y sound in Norway. And the stung is here on the left with a bar is more common in manuscripts, and the one with the dot is more common in inscriptions. And in Iceland, they actually preferred a ring to a dot. So if you've got an Icelandic persona or impression that you are doing, then that might be a good rune for you. Sven Estrithson's coins that were minted in Lund, which is in Skåne, which is now part of Sweden, but it was Denmark at the time. These give us the earliest examples of Stongbjörko and Stongtir in Denmark. And from what we can tell of the overall chronology of how stung runes developed, the earliest dotted runes show up in Denmark on runestones from around 980 in southeast Jutland at the trading centers of Aarhus and Haithaby and in Skåne. And from there, they spread to the island of Man and Ireland, and possibly from Danish settlers in the British Isles near Man, and from there through the Atlantic colonies. And by the first half of the 11th century, they appear in both Norway and Sweden. They were never completely necessary for writing in the Younger Futhark because we see inscriptions that go the whole way through to the early modern period that don't use these. So if you don't want to choose to use these particular runes for your persona or your impression, you don't have to. So bind runes are ligatures where you take two runes and you write them in a way that deliberately overlaps. And this is a scribal trick that makes rune writing faster by economizing on space, time, and effort. And they're found all over Europe, this particular kind of ligature, though their use did vary over time. When you're writing a bind rune, occasionally more than two, but usually two runes are written together so that the stave for one rune also serves as a stave for the next rune. And usually these bind runes happen where one rune is to either side of them, but you can also sometimes get vertical binds like this one that I'm showing here up at the top. Usually they're indicated with punctuation, and these appeared fairly regularly in Elder Futhark inscriptions, but I'm sorry, Vikings, there's almost none. They're very rare in the Viking period, and most examples seem to be attempts to correct runes that were written incorrectly. And as you can see from some of these pairings, they make really unattractive kludges, where you're really shoehorning some of these twigs into a space that they really shouldn't be fitting into, and it's a very ugly result. So this is why we think they were mainly corrections to a particular inscription. So why did these disappear during the Viking Age after the switch to Younger Futhark? Well, Jackson Crawford has pointed out that the runes of the Younger Futhark tend to have the stave in the middle of the rune instead of at the edge, like more of the runes in Elder Futhark do. So there may have been more opportunity for Elder Futhark to maintain clarity and create overlap. However, for those of you who have later personas, like the post-Viking Age, during the medieval period, they definitely make a comeback. And a medieval rune writer could either double consonants or vowels with bind runes. And in the Tingvoll church inscription, the rune writer Gunnar, he used a total of 13 bind runes, including a 3-rune bind in the word kunnu, where you can see the double N here. And you can use this going either direction, and both of these indicate doubled consonants here. So now that we know that it's medieval rune writers mostly who are doing bind runes, what kinds of runes did they bind? And it's usually or plus some other consonant or in some instances a vowel. And you also get the word for and, ok. That's another very commonly bound pair of sounds. And so the statistics on these come from Aslakliestol. Which ones of these are the most common? After the medieval period, our evidence for runic usage sharply contracted to a relatively small number of individuals, but um, we do have some evidence, and this is a letter by Swedish student Nicolaus Andrea Granius to the Dutch humanist Bonaventura Vulcanius, and this is now at the University Library in Leiden. And as you can see, he gives the names of 18 runes and then 14 stanzas that are describing these. And yes, 18. Uh, so he had also potentially maybe gotten this from Johannes Boreas's Runetjänstlernes Lärarspan of 1599, where you can also see that there are runes 17, 18, 19. So I had said that there's 16 Younger Futhark runes and that the dotted runes did not make new runes. So what is going on here? These are three medieval runes that were introduced for the purposes of keeping a lunisolar calendar, where the months that track the phases of the moon match against the solar year. And each one of these new runes does appear to be some kind of a bind rune. Um, these runes are, we barely see these except for the first one of these, which is a bind rune that does appear. These are almost never used outside of um, a calendar construct and a context where we would be talking about the year. And Magistra Sigrid Bryan's daughter, she has taught an absolutely excellent class on um, on the runic calendar. And then we also have a really excellent calendar that comes out every year. And as well, there's a companion book that goes with it by Rune Rasmussen. And so because um, runic calendars are a gigantic topic all on their own, I will simply plug these two excellent resources. And so we're approaching the end of our time together. And I know I wanted to leave some room for questions. So to sum up, different rune shapes were more prevalent in specific geographic areas and at different times. And if you didn't see your runes here, if you've got a persona that comes from an area that's outside where I talk about from this particular lecture, don't worry, there might be an episode on my YouTube channel for you. And I've done 2 episodes specifically by request, so just let me know what you might be interested in. You can use either the contact instructor feature through the University of Atlantia, or you can also find me on YouTube, and I have an email address posted there as well. So without further ado, let's stop recording so I can answer some questions for you all. And I'm really excited.